Okay, Erev Tov Rabotai. I want to tell you some interesting stories that I heard about two famous rabbis. There's one story like this, that the Rabbi Salaman Mutzafi, who was the father of Rabbi Ben Zion Mutzafi. He was a famous Mekubal in Yerushalayim. He moved from Iraq to Yerushalayim. He moved. Anyway, there's a story about him, when he was young, when he was a kid, he was studying with a famous rabbi. His name was Rabbi Tzadka Hussein. Also from Iraq, Iraqi people. So what happened was Rabbi Tzadka was teaching him Gemara, now there's a Gemara in Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Lamed. What is it talking about there? About Kibud Avim, honoring your parents. It's a very important topic. So he taught him over there, the rabbi, right, one important halakha, which is, when your mother comes into the room, you have to stand up all the way, not halfway. All the way you got to stand up. It's an obligation to stand before your father and mother. So what happened was, they learned this Gemara, and then next day, when he came in, to study with him again, he told him, he said, tell me, you remember what you learned yesterday about rising for your parents? He says, when your mother passed by you, did you rise when you went home? Did you stand up when your mother passed by you? So he answers him. He says, I had to tell you the truth, Rabbi. He says, I didn't stand up all the way. I stood up like halfway. Half. Like there's some people. They go half. You know why? Because it's hard for them to stand up. They don't have the energy. To stand up. They're tired. They're very tired. Ayef, right? They're ayefim. So they can't stand all the way. It's too much for them, Too much pressure on the body. Too much pressure on the legs. So they go a little bit, Like this. They don't go all the way up. Yeah, like this, right? You know what we call that, right? Kibud, A little honor, give him, The truth is, you're supposed to stand all the way, not like this, halfway, There's nothing halfway. So, anyway, that's what he told him. He told the rabbi like this. So, the rabbi answered him. He says, what? You didn't stand up all the way? He says, but I told you have to stand up all the way. So you know what he did, right? Once he heard this, he took the Gemara like this. Let me show you, right? The Gemara was open, and he shut it like this. He said, that's it. What did he tell him? He said, I'm not going to teach you any more Torah. Why? Because what's the point of me to teach you if you don't uphold, if you don't keep what we learned? If you don't keep it, if you don't uphold it, what's the point for me to teach you? For what? For theory? Theoretica? You have to keep what I tell you. It's not a joke, when you learn Torah. So he told him, he said, you know what? I'm not going to teach you no more. That's it. You're not my Talmid anymore. Unless, he told him, he says, if you do teshuvah, and you start to now get up for your parents, then I'll start teaching you again, if you do teshuvah. That's what he told him. Right? So they say, that he was a tzaddik, this Rabbi Salman Mutzafi, he was a young kid, but he was tzaddik. So once he heard that, he was in shock, he was like, so he says, okay, from now on, whenever my mother passes by, I'm going to stand up all the way. No more messing around. Right? That's why. So he started to get up all the way from then on. Okay, so you learn this story from the rabbis, right? And we think it's a nice, simple story, nice, nice story, simple. The truth is, there's a lot of depth in this story. They say, right, that the words of the Chachamim, they're very deep things, there's deep stuff that's going on there, So you have to understand the depths of it. Don't just say, yeah, nice story, skaska, another one, Yeah. So the truth is, it's very deep. I'll tell you why. Because you learn from here something, important halakha, first of all. Halakha is like this, if you have a Talmid, you're teaching him Torah, but he doesn't keep what you say. You tell him something, he doesn't keep it. He says, I don't know, I'm not sure. You sure, Rabbi? I don't know if you're right. Maybe, you're just dreaming, This is your opinion, Tell him, what are you telling? This is how you speak to your rabbi? So you know what the rule is, right? a student like this, talmid like this, you're not allowed to teach him anymore. You have to tell him, we're throwing you out of the yeshiva. I'm sorry. You're being thrown out. Why? Because you have no yirat shamayim. You have no fear of God. Where's your yirat shamayim? You learn something halakha from the rabbi and you don't keep it. So what did you learn it for? What is this business? So this is halakha in the Shulchan Aruch. If you have a talmid who doesn't keep what you teach him, you have to throw him out of the yeshiva. Tell him, don't be too rough with him. You have to tell him like this. I'm sorry. You cannot stay here unless you do teshuvah. And when you do teshuvah, we'll take you back. No problem, Whenever you do teshuvah, it's up to you. We'll take you. But for now, we close the Gemara, right? Gemara is closed. That's it. That's what it is. That's the halakha that we learn. But there is also something in the Kabbalah, regarding this, in the Zohar Kadosh. You know what it says over there, right? If you teach a talmid, who doesn't keep the Torah, he has no yirat shamayim. He's not a God-fearing person. You know what happens, right? All the Torah that you teach him, it says in the Zohar Kadosh, goes to Sitra Achra, goes to Satan. All the power of that Torah, the Kedusha, goes to Satan. You know why? Because this person, you're teaching somebody who doesn't know yirat shamayim. So he's Rasha, this guy. You're teaching Torah to a Rasha. Asur. You're not allowed to teach Torah to a Rasha. So you have to tell him, I'm sorry, but when you're going to be a good boy, we'll take you back. Don't worry, It's not forever. We'll take you back. That's what you tell him, So you see from here, right, this is a very deep thing, this story. There's a lot of depth over here. Tell you another story also. The words of the Chachamim are very deep. They say, regarding the Chazon Ish, alav hashalom, he was one of the biggest Chachamim, in the last generation. Big posek, big gadol. He lived in Bnei Brak. This was in the beginning of the Medina, when the Medina was first established. So he came there from Europe, and he moved over there. So what happened was, one time they asked the Chazon Ish, they said, when you're looking for a shidduch, right, to find a wife, what should you be looking for, How do you know if she's a good girl or not? How do you know? How do you find out, But you have to ask everybody gossip, some gossipers, right? Ask the family, if she's a good girl. The family will lie to you, They say, yeah, she's a great girl, but, they're not telling the truth. They're just doing it because they like her, because she's their family. It's not always going to be true what they say. So then, if you really want to know, right, how the girl is, if she's a good girl or not, how do you find out? They asked the Chazon Ish this question, So the Chazon Ish answered. He says, you have to test two things, right? See two things. This way you know if she's a good girl. Worthy to marry. What are the two things? Said Chazon Ish, number one, that she is tzanua, she behaves with tzniut. Dresses with tzniut, and also her behavior is tzniut. Not like the girls we have today, right? Go up to 108, right over there, Queens Boulevard, half naked, walking around, with shorts, and short skirts and this and that. Everything hanging out, everything is hanging out. You know what I mean? Shem Yirach. You can't even look at her. You have to go like this. If you see. This is. My friend used to tell me when we were young. Here I used to go to 71st Shul over here, the Bukharian Shul. He used to tell me, the Persian guy, a friend of mine. He said, so today you go out in the street. All the girls, you look at them, they're all avodah zarah. They're avodah zarah, mamash. The way they dress, it's like avodah zarah. He was right. Have to say, this is what we have today, unfortunately. What can you do, You're looking at avodah zarah, mamash. What can you do? You have to keep your eyes closed. So, that's the thing, So, tzniut is a very important thing. You know what that shows? When a woman has tzniut, I'll tell you in a second, but the other thing, right, that the Chazon Ish said, check also on one more quality. You know what it is? If she does kibud avim, she honors her parents, she treats her parents with respect. If she respects her parents, the Chazon Ish used to say, she's also going to respect her husband. But if she doesn't respect her parents, she's not going to respect her husband either. You hear this? So, they say, right, that one time they found a girl who, for shidduch, right, for somebody, But she was, crazy about kivud avim, too crazy, like very extreme, honoring her parents in a very extreme way. She must have been Bukharian, whatever, right? Something like that. So, right? Georgian. So, that's the way it is, right? She was very extreme. So, they were afraid because she's very extreme. Maybe she's gonna, after she gets married, she's gonna be all time with her parents, instead of being with her husband, taking care of her husband. They said, maybe this girl's gonna, she's gonna go with her parents all the time, never gonna be with her husband. All the time devoted to her parents. So the Chazon Ish answered them. He said, no, not true. He said, if she honors her parents, she's also going to honor her husband too. It's the same thing. You hear this? So now, right, let's get into, this is a very important story, to understand. But I want to tell you also the depths of this a little bit, right? There's also some depth here. And also some halakha, some musar. What are we talking about, right? That the girl who has tzniut and has kivud avim, that honors her parents. You know what this means? Tzniut is towards Hashem, right? Ben Adam lamakom. She's God-fearing to Hashem by dressing b'tzniut. That means that she has irat shamayim. She's a God-fearing woman. That's why you have to look for tzniut. Because a woman who has tzniut, that means she fears Hashem. Because she knows somebody's watching over here. You know what I mean? It's not like you do whatever you want. Free for all. It's not like that. A woman who has tzniut, she has irat shamayim. That's one thing. So she fears Hashem. What about kivud avim, honoring your parents? Ben adam lechavero, right? That means she respects also the authority figures in her life. A parent is an authority figure. You know what I mean? So she respects them. A husband is also an authority figure, right? That's the thing. First comes the parents, and then when she gets married, the husband takes the place of the parents. That's what it is. She goes from one authority to another authority. That's what it is. So if she has fear for her parents, she's also going to have fear for her husband. She's going to have respect for her husband also. It's the same thing. So you see, the Chazon Ish was telling you here, this is how you see if a woman has irat shamayim towards Hashem and also towards people, like authority. If she does, she's going to be a good wife. That's it, right? So you cannot be too extreme with this. That's what he said, You cannot be too extreme. Why? Because if you fear your parents and you respect your parents, that's your nature, You respect authority. Same thing is going to be with your husband. There's a halakha like this, right? There's a halakha. It says, right? It says in the Ten Commandments, right? Kaved et avicha be'imecha, right? You have to honor your father and mother. That's what it says in the Ten Commandments. Which commandment is it, by the way? Number 5. Yeah. So, 5th commandment, right? So, it says over there to honor your parents. But say the Chazal, right, in Talmud, once she gets married, now she has to honor her husband, not to go to her parents and honor them. It switches, the mitzvah. It goes to the husband, the honor, the kavod. So once she gets married, she's not obligated anymore to honor her parents, to go over there, and work for them, She has to work for her husband now, in the house, She has to be chazeka. What are you going to your parents for? You finished with that already. You're done. Now you're married. Stay with your husband. That's the way it has to be. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's supposed to be. So, you know what the Rambam says, right? I'll tell you something interesting. Good you said that. The Rambam says, how often, right, should a woman go to her parents, when she's married? How often should you go there? Once a month. Once a month. That's it. To visit them, to say hello. Otherwise, she has to be with her husband. That's what it says in the Rambam. That's it. That's all. She doesn't have to be there every day, every other day, going to her parents. What are you, child? What are you? You're still a child? What are you, a little girl? Going back to your parents all the time. Now you're married. You have a family. That's the thing, Okay, fine. So anyway, you see from here, there's a lot of depths in the words of the Chachamim, a lot of things that we need to learn. Halachot, Musar, and even Kabbalah. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen, Amen. Rabbi Chani Rabbi Omer, it's a Kadosh Baruch Hu Lo Zog B'Yisrael, Le'tzricha Achiba La'em Torah Mitzvot Shem Le'mam Chafes, Le'man Tzidko Yagdir Torah B'Yadir.